I met Julie when we were 8 years old. We had a lot of play dates and attended each other's birthday parties because our mothers and fathers were good friends. Her father was wealthy, the president of a technology company, whereas mine was upper middle class. Julie had long brown hair and striking pale blue eyes, which always drew my attention. We were both considered outcasts in middle school for adopting the goth emo style. Julie had short black hair and was slightly chubby, whereas I was tall and skinny. I worked hard all summer mowing lawns and saved enough money to buy her a ceramic unicorn. When I asked her to become my girlfriend, she agreed, and I was confident she would. Toward the end of 7th grade, she decided to change her appearance and social circle, and she made it clear that I had to adapt with her or fall behind. So I changed too. Julie had changed dramatically by the end of our sophomore year of high school. She became physically fit through swimming, grew out her hair, and dyed blonde. Braces, football team weightlifting, and track and field participation all contributed to my transformation. While I could have played football, Julie believed that only fools did, and I had no strong feelings about it. Although men pursued Julie, she appeared steadfast. Or so I thought. She displayed public loyalty, but I later discovered she was having intimate relationships with guys from other schools at house parties. Although I was unaware at the time, girls were also interested in me, but Julie would scare them away. She'd issue a subtle warning first, then socially destroy them if they persisted. One girl was so severely bullied that she did not return to school. Honestly, I wasn't interested in any of those girls because Julie was far more attractive, and she knew it. The first major issue I had with her was at senior prom. When I came out of the restroom, some girls approached me and said, "I'm so sorry, what are you going to do?" When I asked what they meant, they explained that Julie had slow danced with another guy and kissed him on the dance floor. I confronted her about it, and she insisted it wasn't consensual. I was prepared to go find the guy and beat him up. But she stopped me and said we should go to a hotel. She had already reserved a fancy room and stated that we were traveling all the way that night. We did it, and I can confirm her innocence. And so was I. After graduating, we both attended the same college. I studied computer science, and she studied art history. I'd hear about it. I got lucky and won a lottery for a fantastic dorm room with its own bathroom. Julie, on the other hand, resided in a luxurious condominium nearby. She insisted on purchasing new hardwood furniture for my room, including a stylish desk chair from her father's office. A Herman Miller chair, and I missed the chair. She always bought clothes for me, even when I told her not to, and I would give her small gifts in return. During my 3rd year of college, I was studying in the library when a friend called. He sounded sorry, saying he heard Julie and I had split up and invited me to a party with the girls. I was like, "Hold up! What's happening?" He revealed that he saw Julie at a party getting cozy with some dude. Remember second base? She then whisked him away in her car. When he asked Julie about us, she said we were over. After hanging up, I decided to confront Julie and went to her condominium. I had a key and let myself in. Loud music was blasting, and when I looked in the bedroom, there they were. What really struck me was seeing her with his shirt over his head and her lipstick smeared across his chest. I exclaimed, "What the heck?" As she looked at me with a silly grin on her intoxicated face, I grabbed the nearest breakable object, the ceramic unicorn I had given her, and hurled it at her makeup table, shattering it. "Julie, forget you! We were over!" I yelled as I stormed out with her calling after me. She called the next day, sounding sorry, but she tried to explain that we were on a break and everything was fine. I didn't understand what on a break meant. I assumed it meant the same as broken up, so I snapped back. "Of course, we are on a break and have hung up." She started seeing this guy who was known as a duck boy. They appeared to have an open relationship, and she bought him clothes and other items just as she had done for me. And she was seen with other men, but always with him. I was devastated and determined to get high grades. I went out, but did not date anyone. I only went to parties occasionally. To cope, I removed anything that reminded me of her. I donated all of the furniture and replaced it with inexpensive items from thrift stores. I had to start wearing thrift store clothes because I got rid of everything she bought me, which accounted for roughly half of my wardrobe. I deleted and threw away all of our photos. I told my parents what happened, and they, like Julie's parents, wisely stayed out of it. I also told my parents and friends not to mention her around me. I wanted to forget about her entirely. That's when I learned she was hooking up with guys at high school parties. 9 months later, she ended her relationship with Duck Boy. The rumor was that he cheated on her at a party in front of a large crowd. She felt embarrassed and dumped him. Not long after, she arrived at my door unexpectedly. She looked stunning with a bright smile, holding the glued-together unicorn. I was shocked to see her. She asked if I had been robbed. I noticed that everything she had bought me was gone. I told her that if she wanted the furniture, she should hurry to Goodwill. She seemed to be hurt. She showed me the unicorn as if it represented repairing our relationship. I bluntly informed her that it looked terrible and that we were done. She tried to explain what on a break meant, but I didn't care. To me, we were done. She began to cry, but I insisted she leave. She started showing up to my classes, claiming that we were meant to be together. I reminded her that soulmates do not cheat. She informed our friends, and they pressed me to take her back because she was devastated. She mailed me notes, letters, flowers, and candy. But I saw everything as garbage. Being around her physically harmed me. So, at the end of the semester, I transferred to a different school, effectively removing her from my life. Perhaps I should have planned differently because I had to attend school for an additional 2 years. Because many of my credits did not transfer to the new school, I found myself enrolled in classes I had previously taken. I barely passed them because I spent the majority of my time in bed. My roommate, who was not a friend at the time, but rather someone assigned to the same dorm room, became irritated by my constant presence and concerned about my attitude, so he called the campus police on me. While I did not get in trouble, I did have to see a counselor who diagnosed me with a major depressive episode and PTSD, implying that Julie may have a personality disorder or be a sociopath who manipulated and groomed me into relying on her. I'm not sure if all of that is true, but taking Zoloft certainly helped. I heard Julie went to my parents' house looking for me despite their repeated refusal. She became increasingly belligerent and hysterical, and her own parents warned her to stop or she would be institutionalized. Following graduation, I got a job and was transferred to Singapore, where I met my now wife. That is a whole other story. I was a passport bro before the term was even invented. We married when she was 26 and I was 35. We eventually moved back to the United States and had 3 children. Things have been going well. Fast forward to yesterday. I rarely use Facebook except to share family photos and post random thoughts. For example, I discovered an entire bowl of cereal in the sink today, so I guess we're Bezos rich now. Julie sent me a Facebook message with a photo of the unicorn, apologizing for what she did and for hurting me and saying she'll never get over me. I decided not to respond. I would never disrespect my wife like that. Instead, I blocked Julie. What surprised me was my strong reaction. Pure, blinding rage. I punched the wall, denting the sheetrock, and was so angry that tears streamed down my cheeks and my teeth clenched. I had a major headache. I swear, if Julie had been present, I would have lost control. I'm not a violent person. I lied to my wife that I had to work late and went for a long, brisk walk downtown to clear my mind. I couldn't leave feeling like this. Now I'm calm, but I'm perplexed by my reaction. Isn't the opposite of love supposed to be indifference? I just don't get how this happened. Perhaps I need more therapy and Zoloft. I spoke with my wife about Julie after receiving suggestions from comments on my initial post. She knew about Julie before we married, but I didn't fully express how much the breakup affected me. I just mentioned that she cheated on me, which led to the end of our relationship. I showed my wife my Reddit post and told her about receiving Julie's Facebook message and my reaction. She expressed concern and agreed with many of the suggestions that I speak with someone about it. I reassured my wife that our 21 years together and 3 children were not a ruse to get back with Julie, which made her laugh. She knows how much I dislike Julie. My wife mentioned something I hadn't considered, and Julie probably emailed my Facebook email address to clarify. I have a separate email address for Facebook notifications that I never check to access. I needed to reset the password. Upon doing so, I discovered an email from Julie. After downing a gin and tonic for courage, I decided to read it, and it caught me off guard. It's worth noting that the Julie I knew in high school was a sweet, beautiful girl. However, after catching Julie cheating, I discovered she was a dishonest person. When I found out she had been dating other guys behind my back in high school and college, I realized I couldn't trust anyone, she explained. So I read her email with extreme skepticism. In her email, she described feeling abandoned by me at the end of junior year, broken and lost, as if her world had collapsed. She referred to me as her soulmate, who had abandoned her. She mentioned her desire to experience the freedom of college life, particularly in bed, and suggested that we take a break. She hoped that we could both learn from our past experiences and come back together for a better life, which I thought was ridiculous. It appeared that her plan was for me to become an expert while we were apart, and then share what I learned with her while she tried new things as well. When our supposed break ended and she returned, she realized I didn't understand what it meant, and I assumed we'd split up. She noticed that I had removed everything related to her from my life, including gifts, photos, and furniture. This made her feel like she had completely lost me, which devastated her. She was even more hurt when I continued to move forward without her, and it had such a negative impact on her mental health that she had to seek help at an institution. Later, she moved to Europe to work as a fashion model. I must have missed the European fashion model booth during my school's career day. Perhaps it was tucked between the rock star and billionaire Playboy booths. She embraced the party atmosphere there. She never married, and eventually returned to the United States after her last long-term fiancé broke up, moving back in with her aging parents to help them. She stumbled upon a photo of us in a box while packing and felt compelled to contact me. What really surprised me was her suggestion of getting together for a drink to reminisce about the past. She claimed to forgive me for abandoning us and moved on without expressing her belief that we are still soulmates and that our story is far from over. She urged me to respond, but I couldn't help but wonder if there is something similar to hand sanitizer for situations like this. At that point, I had already made an appointment with my son's psychiatrist. Given his severe autism since my mother died 8 months ago, leaving my father grieving, I called him. He's now 91 and had been married to my mother for 71 years. I mentioned Julie, whom I'd known for 77 years, and he expressed an immediate interest, so I asked about her. The situation went completely haywire. Dad did not tell me because I refused to hear anything about Julie. Julie repeatedly showed up at Dad's asking where I was after I broke up with her. She eventually resorted to holding a knife to her throat, threatening self-harm unless they told her dad to restrain her, and her mother called her parents to take her home. Later, she was taken to a mental health facility. Our family stopped talking after that, proving that part of her email was correct. I'm talking to a psychiatrist. She referred to my angry outbursts as a symptom of PTSD, which I was diagnosed with years ago after cutting off Julie. I had effectively erased her from my life, but her unexpected reappearance reactivated everything. It feels ridiculous to compare my situation to that of a combat veteran, but that is exactly what it is. The psychiatrist suggested that Julie has a cluster B disorder, in which she sees herself as the main character and the rest of us as supporting actors who must adhere to her script. Responding to her email would only add to the drama. So, PTSD-focused therapy is recommended. I have scheduled an appointment with a specialist. I consulted with my wife, father, and brother about responding to Julie's email, and they all agreed with the psychiatrist. My brother suggested replying with simply unsubscribe. The problem is that my last name is quite unique. If you search my full name online, you'll find a few people in the United States who share the same name. A deputy sheriff friend informed me that you cannot obtain a restraining order unless there is an assault or a threat. Julie could easily find my address, so I'm worried she'll track me down. If I don't, please tell her to stay away. Edit. I have decided not to email her back. I blocked her email and preemptively blocked her from all of my other accounts. Thank you for your advice in the comments. I found a photo on her public Facebook profile. Despite the possibility of using filters and selecting the best photos, she is still quite attractive for her age. 55. Botox and plastic surgery appear to work wonders, I suppose. It's a shame she is so unstable. Some photos show her with a younger woman with black hair and an olive complexion who appears to be her daughter. They have the same blue eyes. I showed the photo to my friend, a sheriff's deputy, and my wife, who got a little jealous. I assured her that she was younger and looked better without any procedures. She's only about pound 10 heavier than she was when we married, and she earned that weight by having our 3 children, which earns her my eternal respect. My friend, a sheriff's deputy, mentioned that law enforcement and politicians frequently keep their addresses hidden to avoid being tracked down at home. He suggested I register as a volunteer with the sheriff's department if necessary. I may need to consult a lawyer about making my public records private so that she cannot easily find my name and address on the property appraiser's website. Personally, I'm annoyed that I have to live like a witness in a mafia film, always looking out for a crazy person. Now let us move on to another story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I am Tamika, a 29-year-old homemaker. But don't box me in just yet. I'm constantly changing jobs, but none of them last long. Routine. No, not my thing. Still, I hustle and earn my own money, even if it isn't as much as Rain's. Speaking of Rain, he's been my husband for 2 years. A smart radiologist, but he's a decade older at 39. You're probably wondering how this is related to my cheating, right? Rain's muscular physique first drew my attention. But reality struck hard when we got together. However, I discovered that a man's muscles do not determine the size of his tool. Rain isn't as heavy as I expected down there. Our intimate life isn't great either. He tries, but work exhausts him, leaving me wanting more. That's how I got into this mess. I knew Rain couldn't satisfy me the way I wanted, but I settled because he met other criteria. I wished he would improve, but he never did. I put up with it, never leaving until I saw Axel's impressive size. That's when the fear of missing out struck me hard. Okay, folks, let me spill the beans about Axel. She used to be my affair partner, but that is now in the past. He's the man I strayed with while still married. Honestly, he's the one who piqued my interest and pushed me to cross that line. I couldn't resist finding out what it was like to be with someone like him. Before I get into the juicy details, let me tell you how I met Axel. So, as I previously stated, I am not one to stick to one thing. I'm all about trying new gigs and staying fresh. My friend Rachel and I are very similar, so we decided to work together as business partners. We recently ventured into the world of online menswear. Yeah, it sounds strange, but believe me, I've dabbled in weirder ventures before. I'm always looking for the latest trends and whatever brings in the money. We tried selling clothes, including women's wear, online, but the female fashion scene was fiercely competitive. Almost every store is flooded with women's clothing. Furthermore, we discovered that women tend to haggle more and pay less than men. That's when the light bulb went off. Men just order whatever they want. Price be damned. Take Rain, for example. He is a prime example of that. He'll order things without thinking twice, and I'll only find out later that he was duped. So that's the vibe I wanted for my business. We tried menswear as an experiment, but it paid off handsomely. The profits blew my mind, and I realized this was a business worth sticking with. I needed money to secure a storefront and purchase equipment. Rain did not hesitate to give me the cash when I asked, which is unusual because I rarely ask for money unless I intend to invest it. Rachel and I successfully launched our store thanks to his assistance. And let me tell you, it got wild. Business was booming, and I was loving every minute of it. Sales were skyrocketing, and customers were pouring in. Many of the guys preferred to come in and try on the clothes themselves to ensure that they fit properly. Rain explained that it was because men often struggled to find clothes that fit properly, especially around the arms and such. Fortunately, I had some free space, so I set up a fitting room. Rain was an early supporter of the business and a regular customer. But then, out of nowhere, he began ranting about how a woman shouldn't sell men's clothing. I brushed it off at first, but it eventually caused tension in our marriage. Looking back, I wish I had listened to him because without this clothing gig, I would never have met Axel. Axel was a regular customer who frequently purchased shoes and ties from our online store. We mostly did business on Instagram, so he never had to visit the store in person. But one day, he decided he wanted to see things for himself, especially because he was concerned about sizing issues. We are both based in Canada, so it was convenient for him to stop by when he walked into the shop. I was pleasantly surprised. It wasn't like he looked different in his Instagram photos. He looked even more attractive in person. He told me he needed some basics like singlets, boxers, polos, and tuxedos, which we fortunately had in abundance thanks to Rachel's husband's impeccable fashion sense. To cut a long story short, Axel went to try on some boxers. That's when I experienced intense fear of missing out. And I'm not exaggerating when I say he's huge. He's really big. He slipped into his boxers and singlet, then he checked himself in the mirror. That's when I noticed his manhood's impressive size. I was completely taken aback because I had never expected that. I mean, I've never seen anything like this before. And I have to say, he hit the genetic jackpot. It was a significant departure from my previous experiences with Rain. So naturally, my curiosity was piqued. I couldn't take my gaze away as he tried on a variety of boxers. I know I sound like a huge dork right now, but believe me, I'm just being honest. I'm not proud of how I behaved, but let's be honest. I was almost powerless to resist if I had not succumbed to the temptation. I'm pretty sure I would have caved eventually. Rachel kept nudging me and whispering about how impressive he was. We tried to maintain our composure until he finished shopping and left. But after he left, Rachel couldn't help but bring it up again, going on about his size. I had to shut her down because I knew I couldn't trust myself not to reveal the truth. I tried to play it cool, pretending I wasn't interested, but the truth was I couldn't get him out of my mind all day. I knew I was in big trouble when I got home and couldn't bring myself to be intimate with my husband. It felt like I was missing out on something, constantly comparing Axel's size to my husband's. I'd never been with anyone as well endowed as Axel, and I'd been dissatisfied with Rain for a while. Naturally, thoughts of Axel kept creeping in. The fear of missing out was driving me insane. It was one of the most frustrating times of my life. I know I'm going to get a lot of flack from people. Being a married woman, I fully deserve it. I shouldn't have had such thoughts about someone other than my husband. But honestly, my curiosity was eating me alive. I felt compelled to find out what it was like because I had felt excluded for so long. And one day I caved and sent Axel a message. He responded to my message a few hours later, which is how our casual conversation started. I brought up a variety of topics, such as new clothing in stock and ongoing sales, to keep the conversation flowing. Anything to keep it going, you know, and it worked perfectly. We began exchanging flirtatious remarks, and before I knew it, he was already asking for my address. I did not give him my address right away. Instead, I asked for his. He handed it to me. The next day, I was on my way to his place. I simply couldn't wait. Even though I tried to resist, my curiosity was eating me alive. So off I went. When I arrived, I realized Axel was quite the smooth talker. I made it clear right away that I was married, hoping to avoid any regrets later on. But he dismissed it as if it was no big deal. Looking back, I kick myself for giving in so easily, but at the time, everything he said seemed too perfect, and he felt like the ideal guy. Next thing I knew, I hadn't just slept with him once. It occurred 3 times that day. I ended up spending the night at his place before returning home the next morning. Man, am I kicking myself now? I'm well aware that I made a significant mistake. When I returned home, it was raining and I had it out. He seemed to sense something was wrong and was prepared to confront me. He went off saying all sorts of things, including implying that I should close the store because it was leading me down a path I'd never taken before. I knew Rain would be upset that I spent the night at Axel's, but I didn't expect him to be so enraged. He said he had been suspicious of my actions recently and wanted to know why I was so secretive. Sure, I had to lie my way out of it because I was afraid of confronting the truth. I mean, how could I tell my husband that I had been unfaithful? I knew Rain wouldn't let it go, and I was afraid it would ruin our marriage. Plus, losing him would be a huge blow because he was the only constant in my life. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him, so I maintained the facade for the 2 years we were married. I was too scared to speak up or consider other options. Despite the fact that things did not go as planned, I still felt stuck with the man I had married. So I decided to hide the fact that I cheated on him. Call me a coward. However, it appeared to be the safest bet at the time. It was easy to keep it a secret because I assumed I'd never see Axel again. I assumed our fling was over, and there would be no reason for us to reconnect. I went about my daily routine as if nothing had happened. I didn't even confide in Rachel because I didn't trust her. Despite the fact that we were business partners, I couldn't bring myself to admit to her that I had cheated on my husband or anyone else. I was too scared of the consequences. However, keeping the truth hidden proved to be a mistake, as it came back to haunt me. I've learned the hard way that deception is never an option, and the truth has a sneaky way of getting out. You might be able to hide it for a while, but it will eventually come to light. And sure enough, the truth began to leak out through my strained relationship with my husband. I mean, things couldn't simply return to normal after I cheated on him. There were signs, and he could tell something wasn't right, particularly my lack of enthusiasm during our intimate moments before the rain. I had only dated 2 guys in my life. The first was back in high school, and we never became intimate. The second relationship lasted 4 years in college. Just goes to show that I had no idea what real romance was like until I married Rain. However, after being with Axel and experiencing a new level of passion, I began to resent my relationship with Rain. I dreaded being intimate with him because it felt inferior to what I had with Axel. Rain was initially patient with me, but he eventually became frustrated and impatient. He kept questioning why I was avoiding intimacy, and I kept making excuses like being sick or tired when we did get intimate. He sensed something was wrong. My reluctance lasted months before the truth finally came out. Honestly, it was long overdue. Rain is perceptive, and he started paying closer attention to me after that. I was aware he was watching me, but I pretended not to notice to avoid raising his suspicions. To keep him from becoming more suspicious, I pretended to be completely clueless. Then one day, something unexpected occurred. I received a call from Axel. I was stunned because we had agreed it was a one-time event. Guys, there's no need to lecture me. I am fully aware of how foolish I have been. There is no need to rub salt into the wound. I made some mistakes that I am not proud of, and I certainly should not have done what I did. But at that point, I was completely lost in my own thoughts, and I honestly believed I was doing nothing wrong. I figured that fulfilling my own desires was just natural, and there was no reason to feel guilty about it. I should have considered how unfair I was to Darren. I mean, if he had been the one cheating, that would have crushed me. So, after calling me, Axel suggested that we go on a date. It struck me as odd because he was never one to take things slowly. Nonetheless, I agreed to hear him out and go on the date. Throughout our time together, he dropped a bombshell. He said he liked me. Yeah, he actually admitted his feelings. I was completely taken aback, especially because he knew I was married. I couldn't understand why he'd tell a married woman he had feelings for her. So what was he expecting? Did he think I would leave my husband and start a serious relationship with him? But with all the problems in my marriage, I didn't want to complicate things any further. So I asked him to wait a bit while I sorted through my thoughts. Following that day, he kept calling and checking in with me. But deep down, I knew I couldn't have real feelings for him. I was drawn to what he was offering. And let's be honest, his bedroom skills. So in the end, I caved. I tried to resist, but the fear of missing out set in again, and all I wanted to do was experience it once more. It is messed up, I know, but my senses are finally returning to me. Back then, I was confident that I was doing what was best for me. I met up with Axel one last time and spent another night with him. After that, I had to tell him I couldn't see him anymore because my husband was catching on and I didn't want to raise any more red flags. Axel recognized and agreed that it was for the best. He promised not to contact me again and stated that he was planning to leave Canada due to a job transfer. I deleted his phone number and left his place that day. I drove straight home, assuming Rain would be at work and wouldn't be home yet. But wow, was I wrong. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me. Rain never skips work without a valid reason, so seeing him came as a shock. You might wonder why it bothered me so much that he was at home. Well, the fact that I spent the night away and did not return worried me. We'd had disagreements about this before, so I knew there would be trouble. I was certain that Rain stayed at home just to confront me for staying out late again. And I was correct. That's exactly what occurred. He didn't even give me time to settle in before hurling hurtful words and accusing me of cheating. I was surprised because I didn't expect him to suspect me of cheating. It was a huge blow to hear him say that. I knew he had suspicions about my nighttime activities, but I never imagined he'd tie them to my infidelity. It turned into a heated argument, and despite my best efforts to avoid admitting I cheated, it was all for naught. At first, he just kept pressuring me to spill the beans. He wanted to know why I stayed out late again and didn't return home. When I failed to return home for the second time, he inquired as to where I had spent the night. Those questions caught me off guard because I didn't expect them. I didn't expect him to be home, so I wasn't prepared to answer his questions. During our argument, he accused me of acting too good for him by denying him nighttime intimacy. He tried to undermine my confidence, so I became enraged and revealed that I was cheating on him with someone better. I told him he wasn't meeting my needs, so I found someone who could. It wasn't until I said those words that I realized he was simply trying to get me to admit the truth to myself. He was unsure whether I cheated, he simply wanted me to confess, and I fell into his trap. That's how my marriage fell apart, guys. Rain was furious, and he almost touched me. I admire his self-control in holding back. I should not have rubbed it in his face, but my rage got the better of me. He kicked me out of the house. That same day, and 2 weeks later, I received divorce papers. He didn't even bother speaking with me in person, and I haven't heard from him since I signed the paperwork. And now I'm just waiting for our court date to finalize the divorce. My stupidity and unnecessary curiosity are now over. I've been married for 2 years. Update. The divorce was finally finalized about 2 months before we officially split. Rain made certain to recoup his investment in the store. Fortunately, I was able to return it thanks to the profits I generated. He only communicated through his lawyer and never spoke to me directly after our last conversation, when I admitted to cheating. I've been filled with guilt and regret ever since. I wish I could undo everything, but it is too late now. My desires led me down a path that I now deeply regret. It is true what they say, you don't appreciate what you have until it is gone. A few months ago, I never imagined I'd miss my ex-husband as much as I do now. I thought that cheating was the solution. However, looking back, I realize how mistaken I was. Thank you for sharing your story. Here is the next story. Nick had no other options. He rarely spied on his wife's iPhone, which she knew, so she skipped the extra security. As a Boy Scout, he valued honesty and privacy. However, with his wife's upcoming trip, Nick was unable to recall her hotel's name, hoping to avoid a potential argument about his forgetfulness. Recently, there has been a recurring issue: imminent separation. The longest time since their wedding, 5 years ago, prompted Nick to consider romantic gestures such as sending flowers. However, Paris, the city of love, contained a bitter irony. He would not be her romantic interest there. Dwayne, her traveling companion, would. Using their wedding date as a passcode, Nick found himself reading work-safe emails between his wife and Dwayne about romantic plans in Paris. Nick's wife, Linda, and her lover, Dwayne, used work emails, which was just as surprising as the affair itself. Both legal professionals like Nick should have known better. Linda was a lawyer, and Dwayne worked as a paralegal for her firm. Their shared experience in document handling and litigation exposed them to countless emails, many of which revealed affairs. Lawyers would then determine whether these were relevant and how to minimize damage. Nick hadn't paid much attention to Linda's itinerary or the name of the hotel because he had a bad feeling. His legal experience helped him improve his intuition and listening skills. Something felt off when Linda mentioned the trip, initially describing it as a mundane arbitration case that would leave no time for sightseeing without drawing Nick's attention. Her casual demeanor contrasted with their shared desire to visit Paris. Nick found her response odd, catching him off guard with a worst-case scenario he hadn't anticipated. An email subject line struck him hard. "Why don't you just drop the Boy Scouts so we can spend more time together without worry?" This was Dwayne's most recent message, which Linda responded to with unsettling assurance. "I feel safe around him." Nick, feeling a mix of betrayal and arousal, typed his response, followed by a smiley face emoji. Unsure of his next step, he chose to print the email on the basement Wi-Fi printer, viewing it as a precautionary measure given his experience as a seasoned lawyer. His primary concern was to preserve evidence, so he printed and stored the email in his computer bag. Nick thought for a moment and devised a plan. He saw it as a win-win scenario. He considered making a romantic gesture toward Linda, only to collide his face with one of the trees in the woods behind their house. Conversely, Dwayne, he reckoned, would show less mercy in a similar situation, and Nick needed to strategize carefully. It was his capacity for strategic thinking that defined him as a lawyer, paid for his intellect, not his physical prowess. Nick had to act swiftly, knowing Linda would soon return from her run. But before delving into deep thought, he had tasks to complete. Finishing an assignment and securing a hotel booking, though not for sending flowers, he wasn't sure why he needed the hotel information, but he felt a sense of purpose in obtaining it. He located La Clef Tour, fell near the Trocadero, a short walk from the International Chamber of Commerce, where Linda and Dwayne would be involved in their arbitration case. During the lovers' anticipated breaks from their hotel trysts, Nick hurriedly researched Virginia's divorce laws. Drawing from his memories of the bar exam 5 years prior, infidelity, he recalled, was grounds for divorce and could impact alimony and property division. Yet there were defenses against infidelity charges, such as reconciliation. He needed to vacate the house swiftly, avoiding confrontation for now. His intention was to stun Linda into disbelief, employing a strategic approach akin to shock and awe to terminate the marriage. Lies would be necessary despite their inconsistency with Scout law. This was war. As Winston Churchill famously said, "In war, truth is so precious that it must be accompanied by a bodyguard of lies." Nick saw his lies as serving a greater purpose, now unbound by oath. Returning to the bedroom, Nick swiftly packed his belongings, placing the suitcases by the front door. He then gathered essential documents, bank statements, credit card statements, retirement accounts, car paperwork, pay stubs, mortgage statements, and Linda's latest student loan balance. Upon hearing Linda in the kitchen, upon her return from her run, Nick put on a concerned expression as he ascended from his basement office, seeing her drinking Gatorade with her brown hair tied back. He couldn't deny her attractiveness, though he found her actions despicable. Nick came to the realization that love was no longer alive. He conveyed his plans to go to Paris with a somber smile. Linda's reaction was immediate, her complexion turning pale, her blue eyes losing their usual vibrancy. She questioned him about the destination, her initial shock, fading quickly. Nick explained that Sven had called, informing him of the need to prepare a witness for his insurance case. He mentioned the judge's frustration over a lost motion to compel which had disrupted the court schedule. Nick anticipated being on the road for a few weeks, but hinted at the possibility of stopping by occasionally for laundry. Linda expressed sympathy, suggesting that perhaps Nick's firm was hiring. Nick expressed a desire to join her in Paris, noticing a flicker of worry on her face before she teased him about sending his resume. Despite Linda's law school having a higher ranking, the Nicks, she made a motion as if to hug him, but he avoided her and headed downstairs to his office, battling visions of punching her and struggling to keep them in check. As Linda asked about dinner plans, Nick explained that he couldn't stay and would grab something on the road as Sven was eager for him to leave immediately. Linda followed him to the door, looking slightly concerned as he picked up his suitcases and left. She declined a goodbye kiss, citing a sore throat and the possibility of a cold or allergies. Expressing concern about him catching anything from her, Nick informed her that he wouldn't be back until Friday at the earliest. Mentioning their upcoming stops in Roanoke and Baltimore, he couldn't shake the feeling that Linda was considering the unexpected possibilities his absence might bring. He waved farewell and drove off. He hoped she'd assume he was preoccupied with work and irritated about being called in on a Saturday. His acting skills were limited to that extent, but he suspected she was already planning to reach out to Dwayne. Nick drove until he reached the nearest shopping center with a coffee shop. Like many lawyers, he found clarity through pen and paper as he sipped his coffee. He began listing cases. It struck him that he had never considered reconciliation, not even as an option. Retribution was the only path forward. The question was to what extent his thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the sound of a ringing phone originating from an unfamiliar number. With impatience, he answered, only to be greeted by Sam Granger on the other end. Granger swiftly introduced himself as someone in the business of purchasing old houses to replace them with McMansions. Acknowledging the general disapproval of his work, but emphasizing the allure of receiving a substantial check, Nick found himself taken aback by the notion of tearing down their cozy home. However, he soon regained his composure as Granger proposed buying their house for demolition, citing the uncertainty of new construction timelines and offering a potentially lucrative deal if Nick and his wife were willing to sell. Nick couldn't help but smirk at the prospect, recalling how Linda had chosen the house shortly before their wedding. It was a ranch nestled in a serene setting, complete with a charming yard overlooking woods and a creek with the added appeal of a treehouse visible from the bedroom window, a symbol of their envisioned family life. Nick found the location convenient with easy access to major highways and a manageable commute to work, informing Granger of his busy schedule in the coming days. Nick arranged to meet on Sunday morning. Granger assured him that he had already assessed the property from the outside and didn't require access to the interior. Additionally, he mentioned that he would likely handle the closing himself through a power of attorney for his wife, who was occupied with work. As they finalized the details, Nick couldn't help but ponder Linda's perceived security with her Boy Scout. Unbeknownst to her, Nick reflected the ideals of the Boy Scouts were rooted in military scouting, emphasizing skills such as stealth and self-reliance. It was a realization that Linda had unknowingly walked into a trap reminiscent of a military ambush. But before taking further action, Nick resolved to conduct reconnaissance with his plan in mind. He deliberately knocked over his empty coffee cup and stepped out to his car for privacy, dialing a number on his cell phone, then another. He waited for a response. Eventually, connecting with Frank Berry, a former private investigator Nick had collaborated with during his time as a corporate lawyer. Frank had often assisted with pro bono legal cases, a reflection of Nick's commitment to public service. Nick recounted the urgent favor he needed, explaining the situation involving his wife and another man. Frank expressed disbelief at the audacity of Nick's wife and offered to handle the matter himself as a token of gratitude for Nick's past assistance in the Rivera divorce case, which had garnered significant publicity. Nick thanked Frank and proceeded to provide details about the house in the backyard, mentioning its direct access to the bedroom where his wife practiced martial arts with the curtains open. He suggested that Frank could use it for surveillance purposes, accessible by traversing the woods and leaping over the creek after dark. Nick also mentioned his intention to set up a camera outside aimed at the front of the house to monitor activities. After finalizing arrangements with Frank, Nick contacted Harry, a lawyer he intended to retain for his divorce proceedings. Despite Harry's initial confusion about the purpose of the call, Nick clarified that he needed legal representation due to his wife's infidelity. Following Nick's briefing, Harry suggested meeting the next day to begin working on the case, acknowledging the need to gather clear evidence of infidelity and navigate the complexities of the financial settlement, given his wife's resources and support from colleagues at her firm. Nick conveyed his assurance that he would handle the situation, expressing confidence in resolving it amicably. His next interaction involved a discussion about potential retaliation, to which Nick responded that he was not planning to retaliate, opting for a wait-and-see approach for his final call. Nick reached out to Maggie, employing tact in his approach. After some initial silence, Maggie expressed pleasure at hearing from him after so long, prompting Nick to request her assistance, mentioning Linda's recent behavior. Maggie explained that Linda's actions had driven a wedge between them, but she expressed willingness to help Nick as a friend. Nick then shared his plan with her. After a brief moment of silence, Maggie responded with laughter, indicating her amusement at the situation. She agreed to assist Nick, acknowledging his ability to make her laugh. Nick expressed gratitude to Maggie, promising to treat her and her partner to dinner once things settle down. Maggie accepted the invitation, confirming it as a date, needing seclusion to strategize. Nick found lodging at an extended-stay hotel outside Fairfax's Beltway, far from their usual haunts. Settling in, he ventured out for sustenance. Although not hungry, he knew he needed food to counter the drinks he intended to consume. The nearby restaurant El Mariachi sufficed despite the complimentary chips and cheese likely causing discomfort. Seated in a booth, he noticed the bartender's gaze, but pushed aside the thought, preoccupied with his concerns. Noticing pupusas on the menu hinted at the restaurant's Central American influence masquerading as Mexican unveil. Nick ordered tequila. Anticipating a brutal hangover the next day as part of the ordeal, the waitress returned with top-shelf tequila and a glass. Gesturing toward the bartender, who acknowledged him pouring himself a generous serving, Nick recalled the bartender from Rivera's legal proceedings, always sitting alone in the last row, dining in silence. He made notes and drank tequila. After clearing his plates, he visited the break room, feeling the surroundings sway like a ship. Returning to the booth, he found the bartender occupying the opposite bench, awaiting him. The bartender greeted Nick warmly, expressing gratitude for Nick's assistance in helping his cousin escape an abusive marriage. Despite Nick's attempt to downplay his involvement, the bartender continued mentioning that his cousin's abusive husband had been severely injured in jail, potentially facing permanent damage. Nick was taken aback by the news, feeling a chill run down his spine as the bartender relayed the information with a slight smile. Nick replied that he hadn't been aware of the extent of the husband's injuries, to which the bartender nonchalantly remarked that it was yesterday's news, curious about Nick's presence alone. On a Saturday night, the bartender inquired about his wife's whereabouts, noting Nick's marital status with a knowing smile. Nick realized that the bartender must have witnessed an unexpected encounter between him and Linda at a hearing, followed by a kiss, admitting to some marital issues, including Linda's potential infidelity. Nick saw no reason to conceal the truth. The bartender responded with a familiar smile, suggesting that while he might not be a lawyer, he understood the importance of keeping secrets and hinted at Nick's exposed notebook containing incriminating details and a to-do list. Nick shrugged off the security lapse, noting that at least no client's secrets had been compromised. The bartender questioned Nick about his desires, aside from money suggesting the possibility of seeking revenge. Nick expressed his desire to physically damage his wife, wanting to break her nose and blacken her eyes. The bartender cautioned Nick against such violent retaliation, reminding him of the potential consequences that could lead to jail time. Nick agreed, nodding in acknowledgement, acknowledging Nick's past assistance to his cousin despite her initial refusal of help. The bartender insisted on repaying the debt owed to Nick. Nick attempted to interject, mentioning Frankie's role in gathering evidence and the police's involvement in the case. He also enlisted a partner from his firm to ensure proper handling of the criminal proceedings accompanying his client to ensure respectful treatment by prosecutors, despite Nick's objections. The bartender commended his efforts in assisting those in need and offered his assistance in return. When Nick expressed uncertainty about the bartender's identity, the bartender revealed himself as Jose Garcia, also known as El Diablo to some. Nick jokingly asked if he had to sell his soul for a favor, to which El Diablo responded with a chuckle, stating it was merely professional courtesy. El Diablo then instructed Nick to provide his address, his wife's name, and her daily routine. He suggested getting a cell phone for easier communication and leaving a contact number at the bar. El Diablo advised Nick not to return to the bar, claiming it was for the best. Nick briefed El Diablo about hiring a private investigator, his intention to stay home until Lindor's departure for France, and Lindor's travel plans. El Diablo knew the location of the Paris hotel, but kept the method of obtaining the information vague. "Just one question, Senor Nick. Is there any chance of reconciliation? Forgiveness, Mercy. I don't want doubts." Later, El Diablo queried, his smile replaced by a serious expression. Nick met his gaze. Nick took a deep breath, reflecting on his emotions. The path ahead was clear. Trust and loyalty were fundamental to him, lacking in his marriage. Linda's actions had turned love into hate in his heart. While he might eventually become indifferent, that time had not yet arrived. "No," Nick affirmed El Diablo, visibly relaxed. "Okay, don't fret." When the waitress presented the bill, El Diablo dismissed her, but allowed Nick to tip generously. He also permitted Nick to take a bottle of tequila, advising him to use it carefully. Nick woke up Sunday morning without much of a hangover, arriving at Harry's law office at 10 to find Frank already there. Frank conveyed his findings, informing Nick that Linda was indeed with another man in their bed. He handed Nick a DVD containing evidence of their infidelity, cautioning against watching it. Harry expressed concern about Nick's decisions, but Nick requested a summary of the evidence. Frank recounted how he had observed Linda and the man, Dwayne Martin, engaging in quite ill activity in the treehouse, as Nick had suggested. They had identified Dwayne Martin as Linda's partner and planned to draft a report, an affidavit for Harry to file. Expressing regret for the situation, Nick decided to file for divorce on grounds of infidelity, but requested that Linda not be served immediately. He instructed Harry to file the paperwork on Monday afternoon before the clerk's office closed. Harry reminded Nick of his limitations in criminal law, cautioning that he wouldn't be able to help if Nick got into legal trouble. "You'll be pleasantly surprised." Nick mentioned as he exited his next destination was a meeting with Sam Granger. It turned out to be an exceptionally productive session where Nick discovered they could sell the house for over $100 more than the mortgage, and without any commission to the real estate agent. Linda would be thrilled. Nick assured Sam that he'd have all the necessary paperwork ready to close the deal promptly. After leaving Sam's office, Nick checked his phone. No messages, no calls. She must still be occupied with Dwayne. Nick seized the opportunity to call his boss, then urgently requesting 2 weeks of vacation, or he'd resign. Since then, realizing Nick's pivotal role in the ongoing case, hastily agreed. Luckily, there was a lull in Sven's workload, allowing Nick some leeway with the groundwork laid. Nick returned to the hotel to dive into the real work. By Monday evening, he was fully prepared throughout Sunday night and Monday. Linda left voice messages that he didn't respond to. He was conserving all his energy for Tuesday morning, thanks to Frank's strategically placed camera outside the house. Nick knew Dwayne had spent Monday night there, estimating Dwayne's departure for work around 8 a.m. and Linda's at 8:30 a.m. Nick planned his move at 7 a.m. Nick entered through the front door, cheerfully announcing, "Honey, I'm home." He heard sharp footsteps upstairs, and then Linda came down the stairs in a robe, disheveled and shocked. Linda greeted Nick, attempting to sound cheerful but appearing exhausted and panicked. Nick apologized for his unexpected return, attributing it to the nature of business trips. He ignored the wine glasses in the living room and headed straight to the dining room where he began arranging papers on the table. Meanwhile, Linda, fearing Nick's discovery of Dwayne upstairs, hesitated before answering a knock at the door. Nick asked her to handle it as he continued with his task. To Linda's surprise, it was Maggie who entered and greeted them. Linda observed as Maggie joined them at the dining table and opened her briefcase. Nick explained that he had arranged for financial and medical preparations for Linda's upcoming overseas trip due to his busy schedule. He also mentioned securing a refinancing offer for their mortgage and apologized for the short notice. Linda relaxed upon realizing that Maggie was a notary. Commenting on Nick's preparedness, Linda joked about him being her Boy Scout, though her cautious demeanor remained. Nick handed her a pen, pointing out where to sign on the documents and encouraging her to take her time. Reading them. Expressing her trust in Nick, Linda swiftly signed all the documents before her. Nick hoped her trust was genuine as he handed each paper to Maggie for notarization. Maggie asked for Linda's photo ID, prompting Linda to retrieve her driver's license. Maggie photographed it and recorded the information in her notary journal while Nick and Maggie exchanged glances, trying to suppress their amusement. Linda offered coffee, but both Nick and Maggie declined as Maggie documented the notarized papers and Nick sorted them into folders. Linda glanced up, anticipating Nick's next move and planning hers. Once Maggie left, discreetly stowing her tools, she smiled at Nick when Linda wasn't looking. Nick gave Linda a reprieve, citing a need for a teleconference and retreating to his basement office. Linda's shoulders relaxed. For now, she'd have time to usher Dwayne out and erase any trace of his presence before Nick emerged from his sanctuary. Nick descended to maintain the illusion that Linda was still deceiving him. He feigned ignorance to Dwayne's footsteps and the garage door opening as Dwayne's car departed, but upon hearing the shower running in the master bath, Nick gathered his belongings, exited through the basement door, and drove away without a word to his unsuspecting wife. 2 hours later, after a hearty breakfast at the diner, Nick found himself in Harry's office. Harry looked shocked. Nick affirmed to Harry that his wife had signed the necessary forms consenting to the divorce petition and waiting service of court notices. He confirmed that the forms were properly notarized. Nick also stated that his wife had agreed to a property division agreement, granting him all proceeds from the house sale, her cars, and jewelry, leaving him full discretion over her belongings, with both parties retaining their respective retirement accounts without any alimony from him. When questioned about his wife's financial situation, Nick responded that she earns more than him anyway. Harry reviewed the documents, noting that Nick's wife agreed to exit the marriage with minimal assets and significant debt. Nick confirmed the accuracy of the information, attributing it to his wife's generosity. Harry briefly scrutinized Nick before returning his attention to the papers on his desk. Nick further confirmed that his wife had signed an affidavit admitting to infidelity, acknowledging her lover's presence in the marital bedroom at the time of signing and affirming the authenticity of email correspondence discussing their affair. Nick asserted that the documents spoke for themselves. Harry, initially appearing surprised, eventually smiled, recognizing Nick's respected reputation and their friendship from law school. He decided to proceed with filing the documents, admitting that everything appeared legitimate to him and expressing disbelief at Nick's actions. Nick expressed immense embarrassment to the judge, acknowledging that he had been consumed by his client's breach of trust. He mentioned that if anyone deserved disbarment, it would be himself. The judge then discussed with Nick whether the notary could confirm Linda's signature on the documents and if Linda scrutinized them. Nick affirmed that he was confident Linda had thoroughly assessed the documents due to her experience as a seasoned litigator. Harry indicated that he would file all the necessary documents that day, including Frank's affidavit and report, along with photos and a DVD. He mentioned his intention to keep the DVD out of the electronic file for the time being to avoid making headlines. Nick agreed, emphasizing the importance of keeping things quiet, especially with Linda's impending departure for Paris in just over 2 weeks. Harry asked Nick if he knew anyone at the county courthouse, mentioning Seth, a classmate from the following year who was now clerking there to boost his resume. Harry suggested that Seth might expedite the legal process, but cautioned that if the judge demanded live testimony, the case could collapse. He noted that Linda would need to decide whether to contest fraud on the court once she understood the situation. Harry mentioned that if things soured, he might have to part ways with Nick's representation. Nick acknowledged Harry's points and agreed to discuss the matter further someday, but not at that moment. Frank couldn't determine if they met elsewhere during the week or at the office, but it wasn't at home. He promised to update Nick if anything changed. Nick made some discreet moves while Linda was away, returning to the house to collect necessary financial documents and signing a contract to sell the house to Sam Granger. With the sales scheduled for Linda's first week in France, during this time, Nick focused on self-care, hitting the gym, indulging in leisurely reading, and reflecting on the state of his life. By age 30. Frank reported the following Saturday that Linda was back with Dwayne at the house. Nick thanked him for the update, expressing his indifference. He noted that once the house was sold, he would rather burn the sheets than sell them. By then, Nick had watched the video Frank had given him. Dwayne, a few years younger, was a gym enthusiast, constantly admiring himself in the mirror, post-workout. Otherwise, he was unremarkable. Nick was in decent shape but lacked a chiseled physique. Linda evidently sought arm candy. Nick had no time for such superficiality before he knew it. Linda was off to Paris. A private investigator trailed her to the airport, confirming her departure for Europe. Nick then cleared out Linda's belongings, packed what he wanted, and had movers transport everything to a storage facility. Thanks to Sam Granger's adept selling skills, Nick easily offloaded the furniture. When the house was finally devoid of belongings, Nick did one final sweep before his last task. He meticulously collected the wedding photos, album, and Linda's gown, carrying them to the patio fire pit beneath the tree. He carefully arranged the photos and album on the embers, adding lighter fluid to the dress before igniting a match as everything turned to ash. Nick was gratified to note the intricate details captured in the video, even discerning each photo's nuances as they merged with the flames. A day later, Nick finalized the sale of the marital home, utilizing his wife's power of attorney to sign on her behalf. Though she really should have reviewed the documents with a separate financial power of attorney, Nick deposited the proceeds from the house sale into his personal account, certifying on behalf of his wife and closing joint accounts. 3 days later, however, during Linda's initial week in France, a construction crew demolished the house. Several days later, the rubble was cleared and site preparations commenced. Unfortunately, the tree supporting the treehouse beloved by the children had to be removed to make way for a planned gazebo. However, construction abruptly ceased with only a bare plot remaining due to an issue in the permitting process. Nick and a friend from law school employed in the county permit office remained optimistic that the matter would be resolved upon Linda's return from France, pending proper form approvals. Throughout this time, Nick avoided all communication attempts from Linda, offering evasive responses to inquiries. El Diablo informed him of Linda and Dwayne's apparent stress, hinting that Linda might suspect something was amiss. When asked about Linda's rings, Nick declined, leading El Diablo to suggest another potential recipient. Nick readily agreed. 2 days before Linda's expected return, Nick received the divorce decree. Unexpectedly, swiftly from Harry's office departing, he received a call from El Diablo advising him to take a public vacation following the advice. He visited New York, reconnecting with college friends, engaging in various activities, mostly funded by credit cards. He ensured recognition by staff through generous tipping at the hotel. While there, he overnight mailed a DVD to Linda's parents' house, showing him burning her wedding dress and album. Late one Sunday night, after Nick enjoyed coffee and cake in Little Italy, Manhattan, his phone rang. It was his father-in-law, Nick. "Where are you? Linda's in the hospital. She's going crazy." "Yeah, what's wrong with her?" It was getting more and more interesting. She returned from a business trip on Friday, but she and a colleague were apparently kidnapped at the airport. They were under medication and were only able to get out this morning. The co-worker was smacked nearly to pass away, and Linda heard her father's voice trembled. Once upon a time, Nick might have sympathized. What happened to Linda? When she woke up, she discovered she was covered head to toe in tattoos. Tattoos with horrible inscriptions. Like that. She was a strumpet and a loose woman. And as soon as she woke up and saw that some guy in a mask came in and punched her in the nose, breaking it, and then gave her 2 black eyes. Impressive. Nick thought really it was the cherry on top of the ice cream. He would have been happy if Linda had realized that he had betrayed her in court, just as she had betrayed him in marriage. But this was just a rainbow pleasure of joy. It would be worth an immortal soul if he could give it away. "I'm sorry to hear that." Nick informed his father-in-law over the phone that he was out of town and inquired what he should do regarding Linda's situation. His father-in-law expressed surprise, reminding Nick that Linda was his wife. Nick then revealed that they were divorced as of last week and accused Linda of cheating on him with the man she was traveling with. Despite sensing his own cruelty, Nick offered to send his father-in-law a copy of the video as evidence. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Nick speculated if his father-in-law was in shock. Eventually, his father-in-law declared that they were done with Linda, indicating that Nick would have to take care of her. After a moment of shouting, his father-in-law hung up, leaving Nick to ponder their strained relationship. It occurred to Nick at that moment that the stress of city life had been too much lately. He sent Sven an email saying that Sven and the firm could go to hell. Respectfully, after all, a quick internet search revealed that there was an RBI store in Soho, and Nick got himself some new hiking and camping gear. Linda had never liked camping, so this was a chance to reconnect with her scouting past. The hotel was very accommodating and agreed to leave his luggage for a while for a reasonable fee. And Nick was on his way to the Adirondack Mountains to commune with nature until things calmed down. Luckily, he had his passport with him in case he had time to travel to Canada, and it turned out he did have time for most of the next 8 weeks. He turned his phone off. At first he thought some crazy woman had stolen his ex-wife's phone because there were dozens, if not hundreds of messages that seemed to include frantic screaming and crying. He only listened to 1 or 2 and deleted the rest. Lots of crazy emails to her account must have been hacked. How could he have taken the time to read all this? He hoped that whoever this crazy woman was, she would get the help she so desperately needed. 8 weeks later, Nick met Frank for a drink. Harry was there too. Harry informed Nick that he had terminated their relationship with their attorney after serving Nick with the divorce decree notifying him by registered mail, Nick admitted that he hadn't checked his mail yet. Harry characterized the situation as a significant problem, while Frank likened it to a widespread disaster. Harry then requested Frank to begin discussing the matter on Monday morning. Mrs. Buford, accompanied by her parents, went to the old homestead. They hadn't removed the outside camera in time. Upon seeing the vacant lot, she had a complete breakdown, falling to her knees, sobbing and curling into a fetal position. Her tantrum escalated with kicking and screaming, similar to a child in a late-night mall when the equipment crew arrived. She lost her temper again. The third outburst occurred when construction workers noticed the tattoos on her face, resulting in laughter. The quality of the work was such that the text was very visible on camera, including phrases like strumpet and I love phallus. Despite her raccoon eyes and duct-taped broken nose, Harry explained that in the afternoon, Linda and a couple of lawyers from prominent firms entered his office without an appointment after making them wait for 15 minutes. He made sure his Glock was loaded in his desk, taking advantage of Virginia laws, when the wait was over. They started berating him with talk of emergency motions, bar complaints, and contempt proceedings. He couldn't help but notice the ink all over his face, clearly written in red and blue for visibility. Once he managed to shift his focus, Harry inquired about the problem in which statement in any of the documents was false. They all stopped and looked at each other. Then he asked if there was an argument about Nick's ex committing infidelity, to which they all answered yes. Then he turned on the videotape he had prepared while they were waiting. And there was Linda, clearly engaging in closeness acts in the marital bed with someone other than her husband. It was clear they hadn't familiarized themselves with all the case files yet, as everyone just looked at each other in confusion. Harry recounted that Linda began yelling that Nick didn't give her a chance to explain, to which he responded by saying that Nick didn't care about the reason as long as it got done. Eventually, she to her senses and started telling him that she never agreed to let Nick sell the house and that he burned her wedding dress pictures and album, claiming they were her personal. Harry showed her copies of Powers of Attorney 1 specifically for the sale of the house and the property settlement agreement, which gave Nick discretion to dispose of her personal belongings, and told her she was lucky she still had her clothes. He then asked if she denied that her signature was on the documents, to which she replied that she did not, but claimed she never agreed to anything written in them. Harry then questioned if her entire defense was that she never read what she signed and asked her to imagine how she would be cross-examined if she challenged anything in court. At that point, she fell silent. He also pointed to an affidavit she had signed admitting her lover was upstairs at the moment she was signing and asked if that was true. This caused her to lose consciousness. Despite his attempts to revive her, he eventually called emergency. She refused to go to the hospital with them but started yelling about tattoos and her boyfriend getting tournament. Harry assured her that Nick had nothing to do with it as far as he knew, and that he was out of town anyway. Harry mentioned that Dwayne might have angered someone else's husband by sleeping with her, or another woman who thought Linda was attacking Dwayne. He informed Nick that he had told them they could discuss any criminal case they wanted to pursue with the Fairfax Police Department, and expressed regret for missing the altercation. Harry noted that things were improving and explained that they were still discussing filing a motion for reconsideration when he received an anonymous email with links to videotapes of Linda and Dwayne in Nick's bed engaging in closeness acts in front of the Eiffel Tower. The email threatened to send the tapes to everyone Linda knows, claiming Nick was unaware and unable to prevent it. They asserted to be friends. Nick had assisted offering protection, but also threatening to expose the tapes unless Linda backed off. Nick claimed he was unaware of this. Harry mentioned that after that revelation, the individuals left without further contact, and nothing occurred at the courthouse. Harry then recounted Frank's encounter with the police, stating that detectives approached them, seeking copies of the tape and the report, but then lost interest. Neither Linda nor Dwayne could recall what had happened, only that they took a cab from the airport and Dwayne ended up hospitalized. Linda woke up in a seedy hotel, got assaulted, and ended up in the hospital. The room expenses were charged to her credit card, including room service and minibar charges. Nick mentioned that New York police and his friends had been contacted, all of whom confirmed his busy schedule in the city. Harry added that Nick's ex was reportedly undergoing laser tattoo removal in her parents' basement, which was expensive due to the extensive coverage. Nick commented on this, earning a glance from Harry and stifled laughter from Frank. Harry then brought up the condition of the individual, referred to as the meat eater, stating that he was badly injured and would require extensive therapy due to multiple concussions. Finding another paralegal job might prove challenging for him as their firm had also let them go. Harry explained that their relationship had soured during the trip, affecting the arbitration negatively. Mistakes were made. Exhibits weren't ready and witness notes were lost, leaving the client displeased. Sacrifices were made to retain future work, Frank suggested that someday Nick would have to enlighten them about something, to which Nick responded jokingly, saying he was a Boy Scout. Frank continued, mentioning that Maggie had waited in the car and expressing a bit of envy regarding Nick's situation. They agreed to discuss further over dinner with Nick, offering to treat them for aiding his liberation as Nick drove away. Maggie informed him that she didn't have a boyfriend, surprising him. Nick then suggested heading home with a stop at the post office first, when asked why. Nick explained that he was checking on a friend's safety, producing a card from the glove compartment bearing a Boy Scout emblem. Thank you for taking the time to hear today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you have not already. Also, leave a comment below with your thoughts on what transpired. If you have a tale to share with me regarding your own or someone else's circumstance, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.